My teacher refused to change the rules. After I begged for help, saying, if you don't like it, then you can leave. I didn't say a word. That was 3 years ago. This morning, he showed me his new syllabus with my rule on page 1. Mr. Jordan's idiotic rules always rewarded the laziest people in our class. His rule stated, no matter what, all members of a group project will receive the same grade, no matter what, to maintain fairness in the classroom. He had a long white beard and wore nothing more than a Prada suit. If anyone complained about his stupid ancient rule, he said, if you're complaining now, you definitely won't make it in the real world. I suggest you study how to make yourself a cardboard home for when you're homeless. What the actual F? I tried not to let it get to me since my friends and I made sure we always split the work evenly. Until one day, when he announced the forbidden words no student ever wants to hear. Assigned group projects. Gulp. I crossed my fingers and hoped for the best, but I guess I didn't cross my fingers hard enough, because I ended up being assigned with the wasters of our class. You know the ones. Constantly smelling like the devil's lettuce, skipped class at least once a day, thought it was cool to have a GPA of 1.5. It's like I could see the future, because I instantly knew that working with them was a death sentence. At the end of class, I ran up to Mr. Jordan practically begging him to adjust the equal grades policy just this once. He lifted his single index finger that was stained with yellow from his chain-smoking habit. No, 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 he said slowly. Like I said, no exceptions. If you don't like it, then you can leave. I had to stop myself from rolling my eyes. Like, why do teachers always say that? I literally don't have a choice whether I can leave or not, but thanks. Anyway, I was determined for that old effort to change his policy, so much so that I began to document everything. In the first week, I scheduled a team meeting. At first, no one in the group chat replied to me, so I started spamming it with Bitmoji stickers and refused to stop until everyone replied. When the day came, Wednesday at 7 p.m., no one showed up. The next morning, everyone texted in their excuses, but it was too late. I already had my screenshot. Mwahaha. And in our Google document, I was the only one making any contributions. Heck, none of those slackers even put their effing name on it. The worst part is that they knew they were doing jackpoop. Sometimes they'd text in the group and say things like, every group needs a beach, guess we found ours. Or, it's so hot how submissive you are. Thanks, beach. But every time I just smiled, because I knew after the project was over, their lives would never be the same again. It was around this time that I did the most insane thing known to mankind. I read the student handbook. After dozens of paper cuts and almost falling asleep, I finally found it. Right there, on page 39. District Educational Code Section 4.7. Individual assessment must be available when documented disparity exceeds 40%. I let out a sigh of relief. I knew everything I had done up to this point would be used for good. All I had to do was prove that I did over 40% of the group project. Over the next few days, I poured everything into making sure the group project was perfect. I even started replying to their group chat messages about how their GPAs would be completely messed up if it wasn't for me, how I was saving them from flunking out. Then the due date finally came. I walked into that classroom like a soldier on a battlefield, fully equipped with armor. Mr. Jordan wanted us to present it in front of the class, old school. When we did, the wasters didn't even try to hide the fact that they were reading off the board. By the end, we all got A's, but their celebration was cut short. Mr. Jordan, it's clear I did much more work than them. They don't deserve that grade. No, 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 he interrupted. All group members in a project will receive the same grade no matter what. I smirked and put up another slideshow on the board, one no one was expecting to see. It started with the rule I had found. Mr. Jordan sat back in his chair like he was impressed. The color drained from the waster's face. I put up every screenshot from the group chat messages, the Google Doc file history, and even included selfies of me doing my group project alone. So I think I've made it clear that I did over 40% of the work. Mr. Jordan walked over to his desk and grabbed the manual from his drawer. He reread the section I had quoted before looking up. In 25 years as a teacher, I've never had a student actually read this thing, he cheered. You're the first student to prove me wrong. His face was beaming with pride, as if he was really impressed. He gave me an A+ and failed the rest of my group chat. I smiled. The slackers ended up flunking out because of how low their grades were. I thought I had won, but the next day when I came to school, I was cornered. Not by the slackers, by the police. They had found bags of blow in my locker. I stood there frozen as the officers approached me with handcuffs. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. Students in the hallway pulled out their phones, recording everything. The flash of cameras and whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd gathering around us. The principal appeared moments later, her face stern and disappointed. She motioned for the officers to follow her to the office while keeping me in their custody. My legs felt like jelly as we walked past dozens of staring faces. Some looked shocked. Others seemed almost excited by the drama unfolding before them. In the principal's office, the officers explained they had received an anonymous tip about substances in my locker. They showed me clear plastic bags filled with white powder they claimed to have found. My mind raced, trying to understand how this could be happening. I had never touched substances in my life, never even been around people who used them, except the realization hit me like a truck. The wasters, the ones who constantly reeked of substance, who had every reason to hate me after I got them failed. They knew my locker combination from when we had to exchange contact information for the group project. Anyone could have planted those substances. The officers continued searching through my locker contents while I sat there helplessly. They pulled out my academic documentation folder, the one where I kept all my screenshots and evidence from the group project. One officer raised an eyebrow as he flipped through it. He muttered something to his partner about high-achieving substance dealers being the smart ones who document everything. Through the office window, I caught a glimpse of the failed group members standing in the hallway. They were trying to look shocked like everyone else, but I noticed the subtle glances they exchanged with each other, the way they fought to suppress their smiles. They were enjoying this. Mr. Jordan burst through the door, his white beard slightly disheveled from hurrying. His eyes widened when he saw me sitting there in handcuffs. The principal quickly explained the situation to him. I watched his face transform from confusion to disbelief as he processed what was happening to his star student. I tried to explain my theory about the substances being planted. The words tumbled out desperately as I told them about the group members' threats, their access to my locker, their motive for revenge. The officers exchanged skeptical looks. One of them actually rolled his eyes and said this was a typical dealer excuse, that everyone claimed they were framed. The principal called for security to review the camera footage from the hallway where my locker was located. We waited in tense silence until security returned with bad news. The cameras in that section had been undergoing routine maintenance during the time frame when the substances would have been planted. There was no footage of anyone accessing my locker. My parents arrived within the hour, their faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and disappointment. My mother's eyes were already red from crying. My father kept shaking his head, unable to comprehend how his honor student son was sitting in the principal's office in handcuffs, accused of substance possession. As we sat there, I remembered all the threatening messages the group members had sent me. I asked the officers to investigate them, to look at their messages about how they would get me back for ruining their lives. The officers took notes, but pointed out that threats about grades weren't the same as threats about planting substances. There was no direct connection. Over the next few hours, while I was being processed at the police station, the failed group members were already at work. They started spreading rumors throughout the school about how I had always been weird and obsessive about my grades. They told anyone who would listen that my intense documentation of everything was actually a sign of paranoid behavior. By the time I was released on bail that evening, social media was already exploding. Someone had posted a photo of me working alone late at night on the group project with the caption, "Now we know why he had so much energy." The comment section was filled with speculation about how I must have been using stimulants to maintain my perfect grades. The failed group members volunteered to give official statements to the police. They painted a picture of me as an unstable, controlling person who was always paranoid and obsessed with recording everything. They suggested this behavior was consistent with substance use, that I was probably documenting everything because I was high and paranoid. Every strength I had shown during the group project was now being twisted into evidence against me. My diligence became suspicious. My organization became obsessive. My determination to hold them accountable became controlling behavior. I watched helplessly as my entire character was reframed through the lens of an accused substance dealer. The school administration had no choice but to suspend me pending the investigation. Just like that, my perfect attendance record was destroyed. My academic standing, which I had worked so hard to maintain, crumbled in a single day. The timing couldn't have been worse, with college application deadlines rapidly approaching. My parents hired a lawyer who sat us down for a reality check. She explained that substance possession charges, even if ultimately dismissed, would show up on background checks. College admissions committees would see them. Scholarship boards would see them. My entire future, everything I had worked for, was now in jeopardy, regardless of whether I was found guilty. Meanwhile, the failed group members continued attending school as if nothing had happened. They played the role of concerned former classmates perfectly, telling teachers and students how worried they were about me. They offered to help the police understand my behavior patterns during the group project, positioning themselves as helpful witnesses rather than the vengeful conspirators they really were. I began to understand the true brilliance of their plan. They weren't just trying to get me in trouble with the law. They were systematically destroying every aspect of my life, my reputation, my academic future, my social standing. Everything I had built through years of hard work was crumbling, and they were making sure everyone watched it happen. My lawyer discovered something strange about the security footage gap. The maintenance request had been submitted through the school's online system using a forged work order. Someone had specifically requested camera maintenance for that exact time period when the substances would have been planted. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. The investigation took an unexpected turn when the failed group members started claiming I had seemed paranoid about being watched during our project. They told investigators I had mentioned camera schedules and security patterns, suggesting I knew exactly when surveillance would be down. Every defense I tried to mount became twisted into evidence against me. The police found my student handbook research particularly suspicious. They suggested that substance dealers often studied rules and regulations to find loopholes and avoid detection. My academic diligence was being reframed as criminal sophistication. The very trait that had helped me succeed was now being used to paint me as a calculating dealer. Mr. Jordan provided character testimony to the investigators. While he praised my academic performance, he admitted my behavior had been obsessive and unusual compared to typical students. His words, meant to help, only reinforced the narrative that I was somehow different, somehow suspicious. Then came the most damaging development. The failed group members produced text messages claiming I had offered to sell them study substances during our project. The messages looked authentic, complete with timestamps from weeks earlier. My stomach dropped as I realized they had planned this frame-up for months. Digital forensics experts were called in to examine the fake messages. The investigation would take weeks, they explained, while the criminal charges against me continued to move forward. My phone was seized as evidence, cutting off my ability to communicate or continue documenting what was happening to me. Without my phone, I couldn't gather evidence of the group members' ongoing coordination against me. They used my isolation to spread more rumors about my supposed substance dealing operation. They claimed my academic success had always been suspicious, that the substance possession finally explained everything. Other honor students began distancing themselves from me. Former study partners avoided eye contact in the hallways. Friends stopped responding to messages sent from my parents' phones. The academic community I had been part of was turning its back on me to protect their own reputations. My social isolation grew more complete with each passing day. The failed group members had designed their retaliation to destroy not just my legal standing, but my entire support system. They wanted me to feel as alone and helpless as they had felt when I exposed their academic fraud. The digital forensics expert made a breakthrough after analyzing the fake text messages. The messages had been created using readily available spoofing apps, but the perpetrators hadn't been as tech-savvy as they thought. Timestamp analysis revealed the messages were actually created after the substances were planted, not weeks before as they appeared. This discovery shifted the entire investigation. The police realized they weren't dealing with a simple substance possession case, but an organized frame job. The fabricated evidence proved there was a conspiracy to destroy me, not just a coincidental substance discovery. When questioned about the fake messages, the failed group members' stories began to contradict each other. They couldn't keep their lies straight about when and how I had supposedly offered them substances. Their panic was visible as they realized their plan was unraveling. One group member finally cracked under the pressure of repeated questioning. He admitted they had planned the retaliation after receiving their failing grades. The confession opened floodgates as investigators pressed harder on the conspiracy angle. The investigation expanded to include conspiracy charges against the failed group members for evidence tampering and false reporting. What had started as their revenge plot was now becoming their own criminal nightmare. The charges they faced were far more serious than academic failure. My phone was returned after investigators finished extracting data. I immediately began documenting the ongoing harassment and threats I was receiving. The failed group members had grown desperate, sending messages warning me to drop the investigation or face worse consequences. The threats escalated when they mentioned my family. They suggested my younger sister might have an accident at school, or my parents might face problems at work. The situation had transformed from an academic dispute into criminal intimidation. Police took the threats seriously, realizing the failed group members had nothing left to lose. They were already facing expulsion and criminal charges. Their desperation made them potentially dangerous. The school implemented additional security measures while the investigation continued. The failed group members' families hired lawyers when they realized their children faced serious criminal charges beyond academic failure. The legal teams began damage control, but the evidence was mounting against their clients. Discovery revealed months of planning communications between the conspirators. Digital forensics recovered deleted messages from cloud backups and social media platforms. The evidence showed systematic planning to destroy my academic future through false criminal charges. They had researched substance planting techniques and discussed how to access my locker without being caught. The investigation revealed they had stolen a master key from custodial staff to access my locker. This added theft charges to their growing list of crimes. The conspiracy was more elaborate and premeditated than anyone had initially realized. The failed group members attempted to destroy more evidence by claiming their phones were lost or stolen, but digital forensics teams recovered the data from cloud services and carrier records. Every attempt to cover their tracks only added obstruction charges to their cases. Evidence showed the planning had begun immediately after they received their failing grades. They had spent months plotting revenge, researching my daily routines, identifying security vulnerabilities, and planning the perfect frame-up. The premeditation was undeniable. Their plan had specifically targeted my college applications and academic reputation. They wanted to ensure I couldn't succeed where they had failed. Messages showed them celebrating the idea of me losing scholarships and college acceptances. The custodial staff member whose key was stolen came forward with security footage from the maintenance closet. The video clearly showed two of the failed group members taking the master key weeks before the substances were planted. The theft charges were now supported by video evidence. As more evidence emerged, the failed group members realized their legal consequences far exceeded the academic consequences they were retaliating against. They tried claiming I had driven them to it through my academic superiority and documentation habits. Their defense strategy of blaming the victim backfired spectacularly. The evidence showed careful, methodical planning over months, not an emotional reaction to being failed. Prosecutors pointed out that their response to academic failure was to commit multiple felonies. My thorough documentation habits were now being vindicated as evidence of innocence rather than guilt. The same meticulous record-keeping they had mocked was proving my innocence and their guilt. Every screenshot, every timestamp, every piece of evidence I had collected was supporting my case. Media attention began focusing on the case as an example of academic retaliation and false accusations. Local education reporters covered the story of how a frame-up had nearly destroyed an innocent student's future. The coverage helped pressure the prosecutor's office to expedite clearing my name. College admissions offices were contacted by the prosecutor to explain the circumstances behind the charges. Letters were sent detailing how I was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy, not a substance dealer. My academic future was slowly being protected from the damage. The failed group members faced a mounting list of charges including conspiracy, evidence tampering, theft, filing false reports, and witness intimidation. Their attempt at revenge had created consequences far worse than simply failing a class. They were looking at potential jail time and permanent criminal records. Their defense attorneys struggled to explain how a coordinated conspiracy involving multiple people could be dismissed as an emotional reaction. The evidence clearly showed planning, preparation, and execution of a frame-up designed to destroy an innocent student's life. Character witnesses from the academic community came forward to support my reputation for integrity and diligence. Teachers, counselors, and fellow students testified about my commitment to honest academic achievement. The contrast with the failed group members' actions was stark. The investigation revealed the full scope of their plan. They had researched which substances would result in the most serious charges, timed the planting for maximum damage to college applications, and coordinated their stories to make me look paranoid and unstable. But their plan had a fatal flaw. They hadn't anticipated how thoroughly digital forensics could uncover their planning. Every deleted message, every spoofed text, every coordinated lie left digital footprints that investigators could follow. Their own reliance on technology had become their downfall. The school administration began reviewing their policies in light of what had happened. The ease with which students had accessed another's locker, the convenient gap in security footage, and the vulnerability of innocent students to false accusations all needed addressing. Mr. Jordan himself began reconsidering his group project policies. He realized his inflexible rule about equal grades had created an environment where resentment could fester into criminal conspiracy. The very policy meant to ensure fairness had nearly destroyed an innocent student's life. As the criminal case against the failed group members strengthened, the prosecutor's office prepared to formally drop all charges against me. The evidence overwhelmingly showed I was the victim of an elaborate frame-up, not a substance dealer. My record would be cleared. The failed group members' families faced the reality that their children's futures were now defined by criminal records rather than academic ones. The permanent consequences of their revenge plot were becoming clear. They would struggle to find employment or educational opportunities with felony convictions. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. I sat in the courtroom watching the failed group members fidget nervously as we waited for the verdict. Their expensive lawyers had tried every trick to paint them as as misguided students who made a terrible mistake, but the evidence was overwhelming. When the foreman stood to read the verdict, I noticed how the failed group members gripped the defense table until their knuckles turned white. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering, filing false police reports, criminal intimidation, theft. The list went on. Each guilty verdict hit them like a physical blow. One of them actually collapsed back into his chair, while another started shaking uncontrollably. Their parents in the gallery looked devastated, finally understanding the magnitude of what their children had done. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month, but revoked their bail due to the intimidation charges. Court officers led them away in handcuffs, the same way they had tried to have me led away. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. They had orchestrated my arrest in front of the entire school, and now they faced their own public humiliation. The prosecutor met with me afterward to formally announce they were dropping all charges against me. The paperwork would be filed immediately, and my arrest record would be expunged. She apologized for what I had endured and commended my patience throughout the investigation. She also mentioned that my case would be used as a training example for identifying false accusations and frame-ups. Back at school, the administration held an emergency assembly. The principal personally apologized for my suspension and announced that my academic record would be fully restored. She explained that new security measures were being implemented immediately, including upgraded camera systems with redundant storage and stricter key control protocols. My documentation methods were praised as an example of how students should protect themselves in group projects. Mr. Jordan approached me after the assembly with tears in his eyes. He admitted his rigid policy had created an environment where this conspiracy could flourish. He showed me the revised syllabus for next semester, which included provisions for individual assessment in cases of documented disparity. The student handbook rule I had found would now be prominently featured in his class policies. College admissions offices had been formally notified about the false charges and their resolution. Several schools that had put my applications on hold now fast-tracked them for review. One admissions officer called personally to assure me that my experience would be considered as evidence of character and perseverance, not as a negative mark against me. The failed group members' families attempted to negotiate plea deals to avoid trial, but prosecutors refused anything less than guilty pleas to all charges. The evidence was too strong, and the prosecutor wanted to send a message about false accusations and academic retaliation. The families faced mounting legal bills that far exceeded any college tuition they might have paid. During the sentencing hearing, I provided a victim impact statement. I described the destruction of my reputation, the threat to my academic future, the isolation from my peers, and the fear for my family's safety. I watched the failed group members as I spoke, seeing genuine remorse on some faces and continued defiance on others. The judge listened intently, occasionally nodding as I detailed the systematic nature of their attack. The sentences ranged from 18 months to 3 years in prison, plus probation and mandatory community service focused on educating others about the dangers of false accusations. They were also ordered to pay restitution for my legal fees and damages. The judge specifically noted that their premeditation and the sophisticated nature of their conspiracy warranted significant punishment. Their criminal records would follow them forever. Background checks for employment, housing, and education would all reveal their convictions. They had destroyed their own futures more thoroughly than they ever could have destroyed mine. The same permanent consequences they had tried to inflict on me had become their reality. Local news covered the sentencing, focusing on the dangers of academic retaliation and the importance of school security. My name was kept out of the coverage at my request, but the case became a cautionary tale for other students. Several schools in the district revised their policies based on the vulnerabilities exposed by the case. I returned to school to complete my senior year with a new perspective. Other students treated me differently, some with admiration for surviving the ordeal, others with wariness, as if I might document their every move. I continued my meticulous note-taking habits, but now understood their true value in protecting myself. The college acceptance letters started arriving in spring. Despite the chaos of the false accusations, my grades had remained strong, and my test scores were unaffected. Several schools mentioned my perseverance through adversity as a factor in their decisions. I chose a university with a strong pre-law program, inspired by my experience with the justice system. Before graduation, I established a peer support group for students dealing with group project disputes. We created templates for documentation, guidelines for evidence preservation, and strategies for addressing unfair academic situations. The administration supported the initiative, recognizing it as a positive outcome from a terrible situation. The failed group members served their sentences in different facilities. I learned through the prosecutor that one had enrolled in education programs while incarcerated, genuinely trying to turn his life around. Another had become more bitter, blaming everyone but himself for his situation. Their paths had diverged, but all faced the same reality of criminal records that would limit their opportunities forever. My parents, who had stood by me throughout the ordeal, helped me prepare for college with a mixture of pride and lingering concern. They had witnessed how quickly false accusations could derail a life and how important it was to maintain evidence of one's actions. Our family had grown closer through the crisis, bonded by the shared trauma and ultimate vindication. The financial settlement from the civil lawsuit helped cover my legal expenses and provided some compensation for the emotional distress. It wasn't a windfall, just enough to make me whole after the damage they had tried to inflict. The failed group members' families struggled with the financial burden of legal fees, settlements, and lost future earnings for their children. As I packed for college, I reflected on how different my senior year had been from what I'd imagined. Instead of focusing solely on academics and college preparation, I had been forced to defend my character and fight for my future. The experience had taught me about justice, perseverance, and the importance of standing up for truth, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. 6 months after starting college, I received a letter from one of the failed group members. He was writing from prison to apologize, explaining how his resentment over failing had spiraled into something monstrous. He didn't ask for forgiveness, just wanted me to know he understood the magnitude of what they had done. I filed the letter with all my other documentation, a final piece of evidence in a case that had changed all our lives. My college experience was everything I had worked for and nearly lost. I excelled in my pre-law courses, drawing on my personal experience with the justice system. Professors often asked me to share my story with classes studying false accusations and criminal conspiracy. I became an advocate for other students facing similar situations, helping them navigate the legal system and protect their futures. The failed group members were released at different times, each facing the challenge of rebuilding their lives with felony convictions. Some moved away to start fresh where their story wasn't known. Others remained in town, working minimum wage jobs and struggling to explain their criminal records to potential employers. Their dreams of easy success had been replaced by the harsh reality of consequences. Years later, I graduated from law school and began working as a prosecutor, specializing in cases involving false accusations and academic fraud. My personal experience gave me unique insight into how perpetrators operated and how victims suffered. I made sure every case was thoroughly investigated, remembering how close I had come to being wrongly convicted. The school district implemented permanent changes based on my case. Security systems were upgraded, documentation procedures were standardized, and students were educated about both their rights and responsibilities. Mr. Jordan, who retired a few years after the incident, often invited me to speak to his final classes about the importance of academic integrity and fair assessment. My documentation habits, once mocked by the failed group members as obsessive, became my professional strength. As a prosecutor, I built airtight cases through meticulous evidence collection and careful attention to detail. The very traits they had tried to use against me became the foundation of my successful career. The ripple effects of their conspiracy continued for years. Other students who had been victims of similar schemes came forward, inspired by my case to seek justice. The precedent set by the prosecution helped protect future students from false accusations and academic retaliation. What had started as petty revenge over a failed grade had led to systemic changes that benefited countless students. I occasionally encountered the failed group members around town. Some avoided eye contact and quickly changed direction. Others nodded acknowledgement of what had passed between us. One approached me years later to thank me for holding them accountable, saying prison had forced him to confront his entitlement and lack of work ethic. He was slowly rebuilding his life, working during the day and taking community college classes at night. The investigation techniques developed during my case became part of law enforcement training. Digital forensics experts used it as an example of how perpetrators often outsmarted themselves through overconfidence in technology. The timestamp analysis that had exposed their fake messages became a standard investigative tool for similar cases. My younger sister, who had been threatened during the intimidation phase, went on to become a cybersecurity expert, inspired by how digital evidence had saved me. She developed protocols for preserving electronic evidence and protecting potential victims from false digital accusations. Our family's ordeal had shaped both our career paths in unexpected ways. The financial impact on the failed group members' families extended far beyond the immediate legal costs. Some had to sell homes to pay for lawyers and settlements. Others took out loans that would take decades to repay. The parents who had initially defended their children's actions eventually acknowledged the severity of what had been done and the justice of the consequences. Looking back, I realized the failed group members had given me an invaluable gift through their hatred. They had forced me to develop resilience, taught me the importance of documentation, and shown me my calling in the legal profession. Their attempt to destroy my future had instead shaped it in ways I never could have imagined. While I wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, I couldn't deny that surviving it had made me stronger and more purposeful in my pursuits. The case file from my ordeal sat in my office, a reminder of how quickly life could change and how important it was to stand for truth. Every client I helped, every false accusation I exposed, every victim I protected traced back to that moment when I stood in a school hallway in handcuffs, falsely accused but determined to fight for justice. The failed group members had thought they were ending my story, but they had only written its beginning.